In this section, we are at the conclusion of the Genesis temptation story, which began at the end of the last video. Now God says to Adam, "Why have you done this?" Adam says, "It was all the fault of this woman whom you gave me." The scene is painted with great sensitivity. Adam, with sad expression, waves farewell to paradise. God, with calm but pitiless look, gestures to the humans to go in peace. Eve looks back with wonderful, unconcealed resentment. God's scolding of Adam and the latter's excuses prefigure the sinners who think to shelter themselves from God's reproof by saying they were born under such and such stars. The zodiac forced them to become fornicators, or greedy materialists, or killers, or the like. The sinners are smug beneath the suns that rose in the signs they were born in, oblivious to the fact God already has them in his sights. The Rohan dramatizes the scene with very different emphases. God looks on with what looks like malign pleasure, as if he were pleased to see he was right about humanity all along. Adam and Eve both stare at the apple, miserable at the exchange they have made. The moral takes on an interesting emphasis in the sons of the sinner's birth signs. These, with expressions of malice or stupidity, suggest a real and powerful astral determinism which makes the sinner's excuses seem plausible, a subtext in keeping with the Gnostic mood of this book, which shows the world as a prison of conditions. In September, under the sign of Libra, we see sowing for the next year. A number of crops, including onions, peas, broad beans, and carrots, may be planted in autumn and harvested in early spring. The sower has his wine cask hung from a tree. Before him on the ground is the seed sack from which he will replenish his cloth. On the ground are beehives at left, and a stone fountain at right. Here the Lord God clothes Adam and Eve and puts them out of paradise. A stern God is holding a shift for Adam by the sleeves, into which Adam, who has never put on clothing before, is figuring out how to insert his arms. Eve clearly finds the idea of dressing oneself quite interesting. To the right, an angel with a raised sword is driving the first couple out of paradise. The angel's wings are a bit hard to parse, since they're only painted in above the angel's upraised arm. Attaching the wings to his back without perplexing the picture was too hard to do. God clothing Adam and shoving him out of paradise suggests Jesus Christ, who drives sinners from his kingdom and topples them into hell. Note God's placid satisfaction as he prepares to shove the sinner from his seat, the sinner's oblivious grin, and the devil so excited about gaining another soul he breathes out hellfire. A basin of blue water has been placed over the hell mouth, so the sinner about to be precipitated in will think he's about to take a cool bath. With somewhat more fidelity to the biblical text, the Rohan shows Adam and Eve being clothed in animal skins prior to being driven out. Here the sinner being shoved into hell-mouth is naked, in his winding sheet, and praying to heaven. It's as though our very hopes of salvation were a snare, and our God a lesser, vengeful deity. Here's the birth of Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve now labor and suffer. Adam prefers Abel to Cain. Suffering Adam sees in woeful little Abel a kindred spirit, while Eve finds solace for her life's disappointments in spoiled little Cain. Adam's preference for Abel signifies Christ, who prefers the Christians and places them over the Jews, who remain outside the church. The Jews appear both curious about and envious of God's obvious preference. In the Rohan, Adam is not shown taking part in the child rearing. This is now clearly defined, like spinning, as women's work. We have two images of Eve with Abel. In the one on the right, she wears the blue robes which visual tradition gives to the Virgin Mary, reminding us that Mary's obedient willingness to bear the Messiah undid the fault of Eve. Laboring Adam, here chopping down trees, is given white hairs, since the Rohan, ever pessimistic, adds old age to Adam's enumerated troubles. Here the Jews stand outside the church, saddened by their outcast status. The wine harvest shown here belonged in the month of September, where the late planting proper to October has been mistakenly placed. We see every phase of the vintage, picking the grapes, transferring them in a basket to the vat where they will be trampled, and pouring the new wine into its cask. Scorpio shines overhead. Here Cain offers up to God his bad sheaves, while Abel presents his good lambs. God accepts the latter's gifts and blesses him. The tale of Cain and Abel, in its forgotten origin in Middle Eastern myth, extolled the primitive virtue of the nomadic herder over the penny-wise baseness of the settled farmer. The story as we have it in the Bible presents this with a new level of meaning. The historical sense is reversed, and the explanation of cultural patterns has become a morality story. The moralizing text here is as blind to medieval economic fact as it is to Middle Eastern prehistory. The Jews in Western Europe, not permitted by their Gentile lords to own property, had to live by hand manufacturers and money lending. The Jews performed a vital role in medieval society as bankers. Of necessity, they charged interest, and this could be high in proportion to the very real risk that a noble or royal client would simply murder or exile the Jewish moneylender rather than repay a large loan. These are the facts that underlie the text of the Bible Explained. Cain's offering of bad sheaves signifies the religious practice of the Jews who honor God with the profits of usury, financial penalties, and high interest rates. Abel's offering of good lambs indicates the decent Christians who give out of what their own hands have earned, and who are accordingly blessed by God. The illustration shows God turned away from the Jews and their gifts to smile a benediction on the poor, sincere Christians. That rock-like shape held up by the Jew at far left is meant to be a loaf of bread, while the bowl-like object is a cup of wine. With no more interest in the practice of Judaism than they had in the details of how the Jews survived, Christians pictured Jewish worship as an inadequate echo of their own. In November, under the sign of Sagittarius, the peasant shakes acorns down from the trees. They will be stored as winter fodder for the hogs. Cain lulls Abel into trusting him by giving him a brotherly kiss, and then asks Abel to come with him into the field where he will treacherously kill his sibling. Cain's traitor kiss prefigured that which Judas gave Christ, by which he yielded him up to death on the cross. God curses Cain and all his descendants to perdition. This prefigures how Jesus Christ will damn all the Jews to hell, to which the devil leads them. The Jews are shown in the distinctive pointed hats they were required by Christian law to wear so as not to escape discrimination. In December, under the sign of Capricorn, hogs are to be slaughtered, and their meat smoked and salted. We see a man about to stun a hog prior to killing it. In the background, a woman brings a basin to catch its blood after its throat is cut, and a man heats water in which the flesh will be cooked.